Mai was a young woman, bright and full of potential. She had the kind of life that most people envied, a beautiful home, a loving fiancé, and a promising future. She was about to marry TU1EA5N, the man she had loved for years, but fate had a different plan for her. Everything started falling apart on the eve of their wedding. Mai had always trusted TU1EA5N with all her heart, but one day, just before their wedding, she discovered a secret that would change her life forever. TU1EA5N, the man she thought she knew, was secretly seeing another woman, Lan, a beautiful and enigmatic woman with a dark past. Mai found out that Lan was TU1EA5NSX, and the two had reconnected in a way that Mai could never have expected. This revelation shattered her. Mai confronted TU1EA5N, heartbroken. TU1EA5N tried to explain, but his words were hollow, like a distant echo. He claimed that his past with Lan didn't matter and that his love for Mai was real. But in that moment, Mai realized something painful. She had been living a lie. She had been the second choice all along. No matter how much she loved him, no matter how deeply they had been together, TU1EA5N still carried a piece of his past with Lan. Mai's heart shattered. She could not accept being the other woman. No matter how much she loved him, the truth was undeniable. TU1EA5N had never truly been hers, and she could no longer ignore the betrayal. That night, overwhelmed with confusion and anger, Mai made a decision. She would go to Lan, confront her, and demand an explanation. She wanted to understand why Lan had to come into her life and destroy everything that had once been so perfect. Mai couldn't stop herself from seeking answers, even if it meant facing the woman who had torn her world apart. The night was dark and the air was thick with tension as Mai approached Lan's house. The house was isolated, sitting at the edge of town, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. The windows were dark and there was an eerie silence hanging in the air. It felt like no one had lived there for years. The atmosphere was unsettling, but Mai pressed on. Determined to confront Lan, when she reached the door, she knocked. It creaked open slowly, and there stood Lan, an image of grace and beauty, but with eyes that carried an unsettling emptiness. Her face was calm, almost too calm, as if she knew Mai would come. "What do you want?" Lan's voice was cold, but it was not unkind. She seemed unfazed by Mai's arrival. Mai's anger surged. "Why did you do it? Why did you have to come back into his life? What is it that you want from him?" Lan stepped aside, allowing Mai into the house, but the air inside felt heavy, as though the walls themselves had witnessed countless secrets. "It was never about what I wanted," Lan replied, her voice soft but firm. "It was about what TU1EA5N needed." Mai was stunned by the coldness of her words. Needed? He needed you. He was supposed to love me. Lan let out a sigh, her gaze drifting to the shadows around the room. "You think you know him, but you don't. TU1EA5N, and I shared something that you can never understand. He has always been mine." Mai's heart skipped a beat as she tried to process the words, but before she could respond, Lan's expression changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Mai saw it. The calmness in Lan's face faded into something darker, something dangerous. Suddenly, the temperature in the room dropped. A cold wind swept through the room, despite the closed windows. Mai felt a chill run down her spine as she looked around. The house had started to feel different, distant, almost dreamlike, like it no longer belonged to the real world. "Why are you doing this?" Mai whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Lan stepped closer, her eyes locking with Mai's. "Because you don't understand, Mai. You're not the one he truly loves." "You never were." Mai stumbled backward, her heart racing. It was as if the room itself was closing in on her. She felt trapped by her emotions, by the betrayal, and by the ghost of a past that had refused to let go. As the wind howled louder, Lan's face twisted in an eerie smile. "You will regret this," she whispered, before everything around Mai seemed to go dark. Mai's mind raced. What was happening? Why was everything slipping out of her control? Before she could react, a voice, cold and distant, filled the air as if coming from all directions at once. "You will never escape." The words echoed in her ears, the sound of them sending a shiver down her spine. Mai tried to turn and run, but her legs felt like they were stuck in place, as if the very ground beneath her was holding her in place. And then everything went black. Mai woke up to find herself in an unfamiliar place. Her mind foggy as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. The last thing she remembered was the cold wind sweeping through Lan's house and Lan's chilling words echoing in her mind. Now she was lying on a hard surface, the air around her thick and damp with an unsettling cold. She blinked rapidly, trying to adjust her eyes to the dim light, but everything around her seemed distorted, as if she were seeing through a fog. Her heart began to race. Where was she? The room she found herself in didn't resemble Lan's house, nor did it resemble anything familiar at all. The walls were crumbling, the floor made of cracked stone, and the scent of mildew hung in the air. Mai sat up quickly, panic rising in her chest. She glanced around, but there was no sign of life, no windows, no doors. The only thing in the room with her was an old, cracked mirror mounted on the wall across from her. It reflected the dim, flickering light of what appeared to be a dying candle. As she stared at her reflection, Mai felt an eerie chill crawl down her spine. Her face looked pale, almost sickly, and her eyes were wide with fear. But something else, something subtle, caught her attention. She wasn't alone in the reflection. Behind her in the mirror stood a figure, a woman with dark, hollow eyes and an expression frozen in sorrow. Mai's breath caught in her throat as she quickly turned around, but there was no one there. She whipped her head back to the mirror and the figure was gone. Her heart hammered in her chest and her mind screamed that she had to get out, but she didn't know how. "Where am I?" she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Her words felt empty in the oppressive silence. She tried to stand, but her legs were weak, and it felt as though the ground beneath her was pulling her down. It was as if the very room itself was alive, suffocating her with an invisible force. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and a faint voice echoed from the shadows, "You can't escape." Mai spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but there was nothing. The walls seemed to close in, and a sickening feeling of dread washed over her. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling with fear. No answer came. Then out of the darkness, a shadow slowly began to form. It was a figure, tall and indistinct at first, but as it drew closer, the shape solidified into a woman. Her face was pale, her eyes empty, as if she were a ghost trapped between the world of the living and the dead. Mai's breath caught in her throat. This woman, she looked like Lan. You're not real," Mai gasped, backing away, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure smiled coldly, her lips curling into a cruel grin. "I am real, Mai, and so is the pain you caused." The words hit Mai like a physical blow. Her mind scrambled to understand, but she couldn't. The woman's presence felt suffocating, her energy oppressive, and the room seemed to grow colder by the second. "What do you mean I didn't do anything?" Mai pleaded, but the figure only shook her head slowly. "You took everything from me," the woman whispered. "You took TU letter 1EA5N, you took his love, and now you will pay for it." Mai felt a sharp pain in her chest, a pang of guilt and regret that she couldn't explain. Her thoughts raced. Was this a dream, a hallucination, or something far worse? "Lan, stop," Mai begged, falling to her knees. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I never wanted this. I loved him. The ghostly figure stepped closer, her cold hands reaching out to Mai. "You don't understand, do you? You've become part of the cycle of betrayal, of love lost and stolen. You're just like me, trapped in this endless loop." Mai shuddered, recoiling from the touch of the phantom woman. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to be a part of your pain." The woman laughed softly, a sound that echoed in the silent room like the whisper of the wind. "But you are, Mai. You have taken my place, and now you must suffer for it, just as I did." As the figure raised her hand, the shadows in the room seemed to swirl around her, and the temperature dropped even further. Mai's skin prickled with cold as an intense feeling of dread settled deep within her chest. She had no idea how she had gotten here, but now she realized that the pain and suffering she had felt in the wake of her betrayal were just the beginning. This was far beyond anything she had imagined. The woman's ghostly form began to fade. But not before she left Mai with one final, chilling warning. "You will never escape, Mai. You will never be free of what you've done." With those words, the figure disappeared into the darkness, leaving Mai alone in the cold, silent room. Her heart thudded in her chest as she stood, trembling. She wasn't sure how much longer she could stay in this place. The fear, the guilt, the realization, it all threatened to overwhelm her. But as she turned to look for a way out, a new realization dawned on her. This wasn't just about Lan. This wasn't just about the betrayal. Mai was now trapped in a world between the living and the dead, caught in the endless cycle of guilt, regret, and unresolved love. And as the shadows seemed to close in around her once again, she understood one undeniable truth. She would have to face the consequences of her actions. Whether in the real world or in the realm of spirits, there would be no escaping the price she had to pay. Mai awoke with a start, her body trembling and drenched in cold sweat. The haunting words of the ghostly figure echoed in her mind, repeating over and over like a curse she couldn't escape. You will never escape. You will never be free of what you've done. Her surroundings were still the same, dimly lit, cold, and desolate. The walls seemed to be closing in on her, the air thick with dread. She could feel her heartbeat racing in her chest, her breath shallow as panic began to set in once again. The room felt like it was alive, pulsating with an ominous energy that sent waves of fear through her entire being. Shaking, Mai stood up and took a tentative step toward the only exit she could see, a small, crumbling doorway at the far end of the room. The door looked as if it hadn't been opened in years, with layers of dust covering the wooden frame, but it was the only way out. With her legs weak beneath her, Mai forced herself to move toward the door. Every step felt like a battle, her body protesting. Her mind clouded with fear, guilt, and confusion. She had to escape. She had to find a way out of this nightmare. As she reached the door and placed her hand on the cold, rusted handle, she felt a sudden rush of cold air brush against her skin, sending a chill deep into her bones. The door creaked open, revealing a dark hallway stretching out before her. It felt like stepping into a different world, a place where time didn't exist. She hesitated for a moment, her instincts screaming at her to turn back, but she couldn't. She couldn't stay in that room any longer. It was as if the very walls were whispering, urging her to move forward, to leave behind whatever darkness had taken hold of her. Mai stepped into the hallway, her feet dragging across the uneven floorboards. The house seemed endless, the hallways stretching far beyond what she could see. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the floor beneath her. Each step she took felt like 1,000 miles, and the weight of her guilt seemed to follow her every move. As she walked deeper into the hallway, she heard a faint sound in the distance. It was a voice, soft, almost like a whisper, but unmistakably familiar, the voice that haunted her dreams. Mai, her heart skipped a beat. She stopped dead in her tracks, straining to listen. The voice was closer now, clear and unmistakable. Mai, you can't run away from me. Mai felt a surge of panic flood through her. It was Lan's voice, but how? How could Lan be here? Was she still trapped in this place too? She turned around, half expecting to see the ghostly figure standing right behind her, but there was nothing. Just the oppressive darkness of the hallway. Mai, the voice called again, this time louder, more insistent. It echoed down the hallway, reverberating in her head. Her mind was spinning. She had to face this. She had to face what she had done. With every step she took, the air around her grew heavier, as if the very house was alive and aware of her presence. The walls seemed to close in, the dim light growing even dimmer, as if the shadows were swallowing the very light itself. Please, no more, Mai whispered to herself, her hands trembling at her sides. I can't, but the voice didn't stop. It only grew louder, more desperate. You made me this way, Mai. You took him from me. You took everything. The voice was now everywhere, surrounding her, echoing in her ears. In her heart, Mai stumbled forward, her hands clutching the walls to steady herself, but it felt like the walls were shifting, warping, moving away from her. The room seemed to distort, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Then the voice stopped. A cold, deafening silence filled the air. Mai froze, her breath shallow and ragged. She looked around, her eyes darting from side to side, searching for any sign of movement, any clue to what was happening. The silence felt suffocating, as though the very world around her had stopped moving. But then she heard it, the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. They were coming closer. Mai spun around, her heart pounding in her chest, but all she saw was darkness. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were almost upon her. Then a shadow appeared at the end of the hallway, a figure emerging from the blackness. It was Lan, but this wasn't the Lan she had known. This wasn't the woman who had once loved TU letter 1AA5N. This was something else entirely, something twisted, something filled with rage. Lan's face was no longer human. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were hollow, empty. The once beautiful woman stood before her, a vengeful specter, her body contorted in unnatural ways. Her hands reached out, long, bony fingers stretching toward Mai. You thought you could escape, Lan's voice rasped, her smile wide and eerie. But you're already dead, Mai. You're just too blind to see it. Mai screamed, but no sound came out. Her throat was dry, her body paralyzed with fear. She tried to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The shadows were swallowing her whole, pulling her toward Lan, toward the darkness that seemed to be consuming everything around her. Lan's face contorted into a grotesque grin as she stepped closer. You took everything from me, Mai. Now it's time for you to suffer the same fate. With those words, Lan lunged forward and everything went black. Mai's consciousness floated in and out of awareness, as if she were drifting in an abyss between life and death. Her body felt numb, disconnected from her mind, as though her soul were suspended in an endless void. The last image she remembered was Lan's twisted, ghostly form lunging toward her, her face contorted with malevolent rage. The thought alone was enough to make Mai shudder, her breath catching in her throat, even though she couldn't quite feel her own body. But as the seconds, or perhaps minutes, ticked by, she suddenly felt warmth spreading through her like the touch of sunlight after a long storm. A dull, throbbing pain in her chest brought her back to reality. She gasped, her eyes snapping open. The world around her was still dark, but now she felt different. The air felt heavier, colder, and the walls of the space she found herself in seemed more oppressive, as though they were slowly closing in around her. Mai attempted to sit up, but her limbs were sluggish, as if they didn't belong to her. She forced herself to stand, her head spinning, but then she caught sight of something. A pale figure, shadowed but undeniably familiar. It was Lan, standing at the edge of the room, her back to Mai. "Why are you doing this?" Mai's voice cracked. She could barely speak, but the words still tumbled from her lips, desperate and full of pain. Lan slowly turned around, her hollow eyes staring directly at Mai. Her lips curled into a wicked smile, but there was no warmth in it, only a chilling cruelty that radiated from her every pore. "You still don't understand, do you, Mai?" Lan's voice echoed through the room, hollow and eerie. "You think you're the victim, but you're no better than I was. You're just another woman who came between two people who loved each other, and now look at us." Lan's figure seemed to flicker and distort, almost like a shadow trying to hold its shape, and then, for the briefest of moments, her form vanished, leaving only the dark emptiness in its wake. Mai took a step forward, her knees weak beneath her. "What do you want from me? Why won't you just let me go?" Her voice quivered, but she refused to show fear. She had to fight back, she had to escape. The air shifted again, this time colder than before. A soft, almost melodic voice whispered from the shadows. "You cannot escape your fate, Mai. You are bound to this place as I was bound to him." The room seemed to grow darker with every word, the shadows pressing in tighter as though they were living creatures. Mai's breath quickened, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't want this. I don't want any of this," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "I loved him. I never meant to hurt you." Lan's figure reappeared suddenly, her eyes filled with sorrow, yet they were also filled with an unbearable sadness that turned to rage. "I loved him too, Mai. But I was never good enough, and now neither are you. You took him from me, and now you will carry my pain forever." The shadows seemed to stretch around Lan, reaching out toward Mai, binding her to the spot where she stood. The coldness enveloped her as though the very air itself was turning against her, choking her with an invisible force. "You're wrong," Mai whispered through gritted teeth, her tears burning in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you, I just wanted to be with him." Lan's face twisted into a grimace, and she stepped closer to Mai, who could feel the icy chill radiating off of her like a storm cloud. "He was always mine," Lan said, her voice low and venomous. "You don't know what it's like to love someone who will never truly be yours, to watch them slip away over and over again, just like I did." The shadows around them grew stronger, wrapping themselves around Mai, pulling her in with an almost physical force. Mai struggled, trying to break free, but it felt as though the darkness itself was sinking into her skin, its cold tendrils seeping into her very soul. Suddenly, Lan's voice rang out, sharper, more intense. "You think this is just about love, don't you? It's not. It's about punishment. The punishment of being the other woman, of living a life where you always come second." Mai gasped, her body trembling, a cold sweat forming on her skin. The room seemed to close in tighter, the weight of Lan's words crushing her under its intensity. The shadows pressed in so close that it felt like they were suffocating her, and she couldn't breathe. It was as if the very fabric of her existence was being unraveled. "You will never be free of me, Mai," Lan's voice hissed as the shadows continued to tighten their hold. "Not in life and not in death." Mai's vision began to blur, the darkness overwhelming her senses. She felt herself slipping, the pressure of Lan's curse bearing down on her. The edges of her reality seemed to fray, and Mai realized with a jolt of horror that she wasn't just trapped in this place physically. No, she was now bound to Lan's curse, to the cycle of betrayal, pain, and suffering that had trapped both women. In that moment, Mai understood. This wasn't just about love. It wasn't even just about TU1EA5N. It was about the relentless consequences of choices, the weight of guilt and regret. and the endless cycle that would repeat itself for those who crossed the line. As her vision faded to black, Mai heard Lan's final words ringing in her ears. "Your punishment has just begun." Mai woke up with a violent jolt, her heart racing, her body trembling as if she had just escaped from the clutches of something monstrous. Her surroundings were no longer the dark, oppressive room she had been trapped in, but instead, she found herself lying on the cold floor of an unfamiliar house. It felt as though the ground itself was solidified ice, seeping through her clothes and freezing her bones. She sat up quickly, her mind struggling to piece together what had just happened. The last thing she remembered was Lan's words echoing in her mind, "Your punishment has just begun." And now she was here, somewhere else, though still within the grip of something dark, something that seemed to haunt her every breath. The air was thick with dust, and everything around her felt abandoned, forgotten. The house was ancient, cracked walls, faded wallpaper peeling at the edges, furniture covered in layers of dust as if it had not been touched for years. She could hear the faint sound of something moving, a scraping, almost like a distant whisper, but when she turned around there was no one there, just shadows, just silence. A sudden shiver ran through her, but it wasn't the cold. It was something far worse. A gnawing feeling that she was being watched followed, that someone or something was waiting for her to make a mistake. She stood up, feeling as if the very air was pushing against her, each movement a battle. Her body felt light, like she was floating just above the ground, unable to fully ground herself in reality. As she moved through the decaying house, she noticed that the room seemed to grow darker the deeper she went. The walls seemed to close in on her. And no matter how much she tried to push forward, she felt an unshakable force pulling her backward. Then she heard it again, the sound of footsteps. But they weren't just footsteps. These were slow, deliberate, dragging footsteps that echoed like the heartbeat of the house itself. The sound grew louder, closer, and Mai froze. Her pulse quickened. Was it Lan? Was she following her? Or was it something worse? "Mai," the whisper came from behind her, soft and faint, but unmistakable. Her breath caught in her throat as she slowly turned around. There, standing in the doorway of one of the rooms, was a figure, a shadowy silhouette. Just beyond the threshold of the dim light, the shape was too distorted to fully make out, but the feeling of recognition hit Mai instantly. It was Lan, but Lan was different. No longer just a vengeful spirit, Lan was now something far more sinister, her form twisted and elongated, as if she had merged with the very darkness of the house. Her once beautiful features were now grotesque, her face a mask of twisted sorrow and rage, and her eyes hollow and empty, burned with a hatred that seemed to pierce through Mai's very soul. "You cannot escape me, Mai." Lan's voice was a low growl, her tone distorted and eerie, as if it came from somewhere far deeper than just the physical plane. "You thought you could run, but you will never leave." Mai backed away, her feet stumbling over the uneven floor. Her thoughts raced. What was happening? What was this place? This wasn't just some house, it was a prison for both her and Lan. A place where neither could escape the eternal torment of their choices. "I'm sorry," Mai whispered, her voice barely audible, choked with tears. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you." Lan's twisted smile widened as she took a step forward, her form seemingly bending and warping with each movement. "You don't get to apologize, Mai. You don't get to claim innocence. You stole my life, and now you will pay the price." The air grew colder, and the shadows surrounding Lan seemed to writhe, crawling across the walls like dark serpents. They slithered toward Mai, wrapping around her legs, pulling her closer to Lan's ever-growing darkness. The grip on her was tightening, suffocating her, dragging her into the abyss. "I didn't steal anything," Mai cried, trying to free herself, but the shadows only tightened their grip. "Tu letter 1EA5 and he loved me." Lan's laugh was a haunting echo. "Tu letter 1EA5 and never loved you, Mai. You were always just a replacement, a distraction. I was his first love, and I will always be his last. You, on the other hand, were just a fleeting moment in his life, a blip in time. You were nothing." The words cut deeper than anything Mai had ever felt. The betrayal she thought she had overcome, had it really been this hollow? Was her love for Tu letter 1EA5 and always meaningless, like Lan said? Was she always just a shadow of someone else's love? With every step Lan took toward her, the walls seemed to close in even more. Mai's breath became shallow as the dark force overwhelmed her. The whispers, the curses, and the shadowy figures seemed to multiply, closing in on her, suffocating her in this labyrinth of horror. "You will stay here with me, Mai," Lan's voice rumbled. You will be trapped just like I was, and you will never escape, not now, not ever. Mai's body felt like it was being pulled apart by the darkness, but deep within her a spark of resistance remained, despite everything. Despite the overwhelming fear and despair, a small part of her still clung to the belief that she could escape, that she could still find a way out. With one final burst of strength, Mai cried out, "No, I won't let you do this." The shadows recoiled, momentarily releasing their grip on her. In that instant, Mai turned and ran. Her legs moved instinctively, carrying her down the long, winding corridors of the house. The sound of Lan's distorted laughter echoed behind her, a constant reminder that she wasn't free. The house itself seemed to shift and bend around her like it was alive, trying to trap her within its walls. The farther she ran, the more she realized she wasn't just running from Lan, she was running from herself, from the consequences of her actions, from the guilt that weighed her down like chains around her heart. But no matter how fast she ran, no matter how much she struggled, the darkness followed, closing in, never allowing her to escape. The walls of the house seemed to blur, twisting into an endless maze, and she realized with growing terror that she was trapped not just by the house, but by the curse she had brought upon herself. The door ahead of her opened, revealing only more darkness, more shadows, and in the center, Lan's twisted form stood, waiting for her. "Now you belong to me," Lan whispered, her voice cold and final. Mai had nowhere to run. Mai could no longer tell where the nightmare began or where it ended. Everything around her had become one continuous blur of shadows and whispers. The house, with its crumbling walls and dark corridors, felt like it was alive with suffering, regret, and anger. It was as if it had been built to hold secrets, to contain the very souls of those who had come here never to leave. She stumbled through the dark, her legs weak, every breath more labored than the last. The sound of Lan's eerie laughter echoed in her ears, always one step behind, just beyond her reach. No matter how fast she ran, no matter how hard she tried to escape, the darkness surrounded her, pulling her back toward the inevitable. "You can't outrun it," Lan's voice hissed from the shadows, filling the room like smoke. "You can't outrun me." Mai's heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't just running from Lan anymore, she was running from the truth that had been buried deep inside her all along, the guilt, the shame, the knowledge that in some twisted way she was complicit in her own torment. She paused for a moment, gasping for air, her body trembling as the coldness of the air seeped deeper into her skin. The house seemed to close in on her from all sides. She pressed her hands against the walls, desperate for any kind of support. They felt slick, damp, like they were pulsing with some unseen energy. "No," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I won't be trapped here, I won't be like you." But even as she spoke, she felt it. The weight of the darkness pressing against her, suffocating her, pulling her into the depths of the house. The walls seemed to shift, and suddenly she was no longer in the hallway. The room around her was different, darker, colder, more oppressive. It was a small, dimly lit room, its only source of light coming from a single candle flickering weakly on a wooden table. The table was covered with old, yellowed papers, pages from a diary, perhaps. Or old letters, but they were too faded to read. At the far end of the room, a large mirror stood against the wall, cracked and dusty. Mai's breath caught in her throat as she realized she was not alone. The reflection in the mirror wasn't her own. It was Lan, her ghostly form, standing in the same pose Mai was. Her eyes, dark and hollow, stared back at Mai from the mirror, filled with an emotion that Mai couldn't quite place. Was it pity, hatred, or perhaps both? "You see now." Lan's voice came from the reflection, and the chill in it sent a shiver down Mai's spine. "Do you see what you've done?" Mai stepped closer to the mirror, her face drawn with terror. The image of Lan began to shift, changing, becoming more grotesque, more twisted. The reflection was no longer just Lan's ghostly figure, it was something more. The figure in the mirror was a fusion of Lan and herself, their faces melded together in a horrific fusion, their eyes wide with a shared, painful understanding. "You and I were the same," the figure whispered, its voice no longer just Lan's, but a mixture of both their voices, cold and hollow. "We are both trapped in this endless cycle, both of us, betrayed." Mai's knees buckled and she collapsed to the floor, her body trembling. "No, I didn't betray you, I didn't know." "But you did," the figure interrupted, its voice rising in pitch, becoming more insistent, more desperate. "You thought you could take his love, you thought you could replace me, but you're just another version of me. Another woman cursed to live in the shadow of someone else's love." The reflection of Lan and Mai in the mirror seemed to move on its own, as if it had come to life. The two women in the mirror began to reach out toward her, their hands pressing against the glass as though trying to pull her inside. Mai screamed, but no sound came out. Her hands gripped the floor beneath her as she struggled to push herself away from the mirror, but the pull was too strong. "You belong to me now." The figure in the mirror whispered, the words seeping into her very soul. "You've crossed the line, you can never be free of this." The room around Mai seemed to warp, the walls closing in, the shadows shifting and twisting into dark shapes. She could feel the suffocating weight of it all, Lan's curse, her own guilt, the endless cycle of betrayal and sorrow. It was all consuming, there was no escape. In a final, desperate act, Mai reached out for the mirror, fingers brushing against the cold glass. As soon as her hand made contact, the mirror cracked, the sharp sound echoing through the room. The reflection of Lan and herself shattered, the pieces falling away like fragments of her broken reality. But as the glass fell to the ground, Mai didn't feel free. She felt something else, a deep, gnawing pain in her chest, as if the very fabric of her existence was being torn apart. She had thought that breaking the mirror would free her, but instead, it only revealed the truth. The truth that no matter what she did, no matter how hard she tried to escape, she was bound to the curse. She was bound to Lan, to the betrayal, to the endless cycle of love lost and never truly gained. Mai staggered back, her body trembling with the weight of her realization. She was trapped in this house, trapped in this curse, and worse, she was trapped with herself. The voice of Lan echoed in the air one final time, cold and final. "You can never escape. You will never be free, we are one now." Mai's vision blurred and the darkness closed in around her once again. This time it wasn't just Lan's spirit that haunted her, it was her own soul, twisted by guilt, regret, and the pain of betrayal. And as the shadows swallowed her whole, she understood. There would be no escape, not now, not ever. Mai felt herself falling. There was no floor beneath her, no walls surrounding her, just an endless void that seemed to stretch forever. Her heart pounded in her chest, the fear suffocating her as she drifted in the dark. She had thought she'd broken free from the house, from Lan's curse, but now in this endless space, it felt like she had only just begun to understand the depth of her entrapment. For what felt like an eternity, the void swallowed her thoughts, her screams, her very existence. She couldn't tell if time was moving or if she was stuck in a moment that would never end. It was as if she had been separated from reality, left to float forever in a space without beginning or end. And then a light, faint at first, like a distant star, began to flicker in the distance. The light slowly grew stronger, pulsing as though it were calling to her. Without thinking, she reached out for it, her arms flailing through the air. The darkness around her seemed to resist, pulling at her, but she fought against it, determined to reach the light. She stretched out, her fingers finally brushing the light. The instant she touched it, the darkness shattered like glass, and she was thrust back into the real world, into the cold, damp room where this nightmare had all begun. The house was still there, but now it felt different, more empty, more final. The air was thick with silence, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Mai could breathe again. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, her body trembling as the weight of what had happened settled on her shoulders. She was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. Her mind was a whirlwind of guilt, pain, and sorrow, but there was one thought that remained crystal clear. She had to face the consequences of her actions. Lan's curse had been a manifestation of her own guilt, a haunting reminder of her betrayal. But what if breaking the cycle, facing that guilt head-on, was the only way to find peace? Mai wasn't sure if it was possible, but one thing was certain. She couldn't live in this endless cycle of regret. As Mai struggled to stand, the shadows in the room seemed to flicker, like they were fading into the light. She walked to the mirror, the cracked reflection staring back at her. It was her own face, but now there was a sense of recognition. For the first time, Mai truly saw herself, not as the victim of a curse, not as the betrayer, but as someone who had faced the truth. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the mirror, her voice raw with emotion. "I'm sorry for everything." And just as the words left her lips, a soft wind blew through the room, carrying with it the faintest scent of jasmine. It was a familiar scent, the scent that had always reminded her of her grandmother, the one person who had always shown her love without judgment. The wind swirled around her gently as if it were a comforting embrace. The shadows in the room slowly dissipated, the darkness lifting. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the house no longer felt oppressive. The cold air no longer had a grip on her heart. Land's spirit, the curse, the endless torment, it all began to fade. The finality of it all was overwhelming, but Mai didn't run. She stood still, breathing in the air around her, accepting the truth. The house that had once trapped her was now nothing more than a memory, a ghost of a past that no longer had power over her. And then, as the last of the shadows lifted, Mai felt a lightness in her chest. It was as though a great weight had been lifted, a burden she had carried for too long finally lifted from her soul. Land's voice echoed one last time, but this time it was different. It wasn't a threat or a curse, it was a whisper of understanding. "You're free now, Mai." For the first time in so long, Mai smiled. It wasn't a smile of relief, nor one of joy. It was simply a smile that came from accepting herself, her mistakes, and the journey she had been through. She had faced her fears, her guilt, and the vengeful spirit of Lan, and in doing so, she had freed herself from the chains of her past. The house, the shadows, the curse, they were all gone now. Mai stood alone in the silence, but it was a silence that no longer felt oppressive. It was peaceful, almost comforting. The final reckoning had come, and with it, the understanding that true freedom comes not from escaping the past, but from embracing it, learning from it, and moving forward. Mai had finally found peace.